Hello, everyone. Welcome to our workshop today. I'm just going to give it another minute or so for folks to join. Looks like there's a few more joining a little late, so we'll go ahead and give them a minute or so, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, looks like we have most folks joined now. Welcome to our Nitro workshop on workflows. My name is James Restivo with Hurricane Software, of course. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Nitro Workflow tool. It's going to be a little bit mix of some basic functionality just to reconfirm some of the things that we can do with it. But then we'll also talk about some of the newer features and some of the more advanced pieces of that workflow tool. So certainly ask any questions at any point in time. There is a questions box in the panel on the webinar, GoToWebinar screen. We also have Scott Restivo from Crow Canyon on the call who can chime in any questions. He'll answer them and then also chime in if there's any that makes sense to bring forward to the whole group here. So we'll see what gets asked, and feel free to use that box anytime you need to. I wanted to start out today with a poll. So the poll is basically just a couple things, features that we have in the workflow tool, and just get a sense of what you guys are interested in learning about. And you'll see one of the questions when preparing up the poll, one of the options is going to be to enter any features or things you want to learn more about into the questions box. So if what you want to learn about is not there, then go ahead and put that in the box, in the questions box. So I go ahead and launch that poll now. I'll give you about 30 seconds to a minute to respond. So go ahead and hit launch. All right, so that poll is now open. And so you go ahead and click as many as you want. It should be multiple selections, so you should be able to select multiple options if you're looking to learn more about any of these items. Go ahead and click that on there. Otherwise, you can go ahead and pop your question into the questions box if it's not available for what you want to learn about. Okay, we'll give that another few seconds to cycle through. All right, so I just went ahead and close that poll. Thank you so much for participating. Looks like we have about 2/3 of the folks are interested in the variables and query list action, so I can dig into that piece. There's a number of you interested in the add, update, and delete functions, and I also see some questions popping into the box below. So we'll go ahead and talk about those as well. And if there's anything else that comes up, or if you didn't get a chance to answer the poll, I apologize. Go ahead and put that into the questions box, and we'll get your, we'll talk about those features. So I wanted to dig into it and just go ahead and get started with this Nitro Workflows tool. As you may be aware, this is our workflow tool for kicking off business processes or managing business processes throughout different applications, either out of the box Crow Canyon applications or your own business process that you build out with a Nitro site. So to get to it, you can go to your Nitro Studio page. You can go to Nitro Workflows, which is the link right here. It's one of the core apps, I guess you could say, we have in the Nitro Studio product. So I've actually already opened it over here on the other tab, so I'll just switch over to that tab instead of clicking it again. And just a quick run through. I mean, you probably all know this. You give it a name, give it a list that you associate it with. So this is connected to a particular list, but that doesn't prevent you from bringing in data from other lists and using that in your workflow, which is what you can do with the query lists and what you can do with the variables. So you can bring data from other lists, but essentially this is the list on which you're going to kick off that flow and run some process, whatever that might be. So let's just pick one of our lists here, just kind of walk through some of the options we have. We'll give it a name, of course, demo workflow. Let's give it a demo workflow. And then on when to start the workflow, so this is where we've added in a new feature for this asynchronous workflow kickoff. So I'll talk about that. It's essentially a way for you to control when that workflow kicks off for an event, such as when an item is created or added or modified on a list. So in general, we have these options up here at the top where you can kick off a workflow when an item is created. You can kick that off when an item is modified. You also have the option for when an item is deleted. This gives you a little more flexibility too. And if you have multiple flows working on that SharePoint list, let's say you have multiple Nitro workflows, let's say you're using a Power Automate flow along with it. Basically, this is intended to help avoid conflicts with those multiple things happening at one time. So just as an example, in our IT help desk tool, you have a ticket that gets created, but there's a lot of things that happen to that ticket once it gets created. So it gets a case ID assigned to it. It gets auto assigned to an individual. So we're updating the case ID field. We're updating the assigned staff field, potentially updating a due date field. So there's a number of things that are happening on that ticket. And if you have a similar scenario where you're updating multiple items or in multiple ways or sending out multiple processes, this gives you a way to kick off this workflow after all those other things are done, essentially. So you can do it some number of minutes after an item is modified or after an item is created. And it's going to be the same. So you do something like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Just be aware that workflow is going to wait that long before it kicks off. Essentially just giving it time to complete those items before it runs off. So that's what the asynchronous means. It's just giving you a space between that kickoff, the actual event happening, and the rest of the actions. The other options here, of course, you can do based on datetime column. So we could kick it off on a schedule based on something in the column or in a field, like due date or like modified date. As a matter of fact, you could do something like that where some number of minutes after modified. You can do minutes before as well. Instead of using negative, it's better to use before, actually. And you could do something like it just has to be done, or this workflow kicks off based on that date. And then we also have options for scheduling workflows in a more kind of broader sense. You're not relying on a date field now on the item. Now we're looking at something to kick off every so often at an absolute time. So based on date time column is going to be a relative time based on what's in that box, in that field. And then the scheduled is going to be an absolute time where we're looking at doing it based on some schedule every hour, every day at a certain hour, which is counting the number of hours from midnight based on the time zone of the site settings, regional site settings. Or we could do it every week or every month and have some options for that. You also notice one of the things we have here too that's kind of neat is this user triggered option where you can go and kick off a workflow based on an invocation from somewhere else. So this is one way that you can chain workflows together. So if you wanted to cascade workflows, or if you even wanted to invoke it from the context of a custom action, this is what you would do. So you create the workflow, mark it as user triggered, make sure that you have the trigger options. This is important if you're doing the user triggered or actually user triggered, and you're going to be using a custom action to trigger it. This is where you would do that. And then scheduled report is kind of the same as the scheduled, the scheduled query here. Instead of up there, it's a scheduled report. This is kind of intended to be focused in on sending out a send mail action, which can have a report, one of our Nitro reports, or it can have a view, one of your list views from the list embedded in that mail, in that send mail. So it gives you a way to have that automated every, however often you set it up to do it. All right, so we had a lot of folks were asking about the queries lists and the variables and what that's all about. So let's talk about that, because I will mention quickly, you do have these kind of standard items for running workflows or creating actions for the workflow, adding items, updating list items, deleting list items, sending email we talked about. So there's different options there. We also have that query list, but we can tie that into a variable as well. So what I mean by variable, it's really just a placeholder for you to use later in your workflow. So you can input data into it, or you can use it for processing data. Let's say you want to do something like a variable like this, where you get today's date. So you can actually use a variable, and let me just make that explicit. So do today. So our variable is today, and our default value is today, and that's going to allow us to refer to this variable name in functions. Another way to use it, and probably one of the more common ways to use it, is if you're doing some kind of a lookup or a function, because we don't have right now a way to embed functions and other functions, and I'll talk about that when we get into the context of like column mappings. You'll have a function like string concatenation, for instance, or you want to parse a lookup value. That's actually a better one. Parse lookup value. And then you get the lookup value in here. This can be referential to a field on that list. So if we go back to our list, which I think was demo opportunities, we can look at a field on there like account or tag or something like that. Status, let's say status. We can do, let's pull up a lookup field actually. So account is a lookup. We'll go ahead and use that. We do account, type account. So that gives me a reference to the lookup ID, basically the lookup ID of that account value. You do like account ID. Now I can use that later on in my workflow to get that. So now I've embedded a function into our default value, and now I can use that later on. So it can be used so variables, going back to it, are really used in a couple of different ways like that. So it could be static value, it could even be just a blank value, or it could be a function like that parse lookup value or today or something like that. So you create that. I'm gonna go back to use today, just as an example. And let's see, parse. Let me just go look at a column mapping real quick, because I know we have a way to parse a date field, and that's one of the things we'll probably want to do. Do current. And it's escaping me at the moment. Parse calc date. Nope, it's. Oh, I'm not seeing it at the moment. Get user property date diff. Yeah, there's one where you can extract the date of that today, rather than, because when you use the today value, a lot of times it'll give you a lot of extra characters that you might not need. Format value, that's it. Format value, that's the one I want to use. All right, let me go back. So we can do something like this. Today, format value, today. Okay, now revisit what this is going to do. It's going to, so this function as it's written, we'll take the today value and get the actual date of it, rather than adding in any regional time settings. There's when you use this today value, it can add a lot of, like I said, extra characters to it. This format value function will allow you to remove those special characters. And we could use this, then we can use this variable later on in our process to, let's say, create a new item in a list. So if we use this, so we hit OK, and we go to like add a list item. Let's say we want to add something to a task list. And we're going to add something to, I don't have a task list in here, but that's okay. I'll just go ahead and create it in our demo list. And then when I go and use my mapping, I'm going to update a field like title. And now I can use the string cat, which is string concatenation, to bring information from the item into that new item. So we could do, see, title of this field, maybe. Title, and then we can use that today, hash value. So that's one use case here of that variable. So what we did, just kind of walk backwards a little bit. We created a variable called today. We assigned a function to it, which was going to format the value of the date. into a usable, just the month/day/year. And then we're going to format that so it's only bring that information back. And now we're going to use it in the context of this function. And the reason we would need to do that is that this does not work. So we cannot do this. And do today. That won't work. It won't do it. So that's why I mean when we can't nest functions, we have to maybe put them in a variable and then use them later on. So that's how you do that, to do today. And then to refer to the value, it's literally that, today # value. That's how you get to that variable and then read that variable, the value of that variable and use it. So you could directly use that in fields as well. So if you wanted to instead just set the due date or some date field, you could do that. But in that case, you also have the today function here, which will work just as nicely for that kind of thing. So not only can we set the variables to contain a function, because we can't nest functions, we can use the functions. We could use a literal value like a number 1, 2, 3, 4. We could use we can also create one with an empty. So let's say we want to do something where it's like approver. So when we use in our approval workflows, so if you've seen those webinars, you'll see this as part of those approval workflows. And it's just literally an empty null value that you can then use as a reference later on in your workflow. So you can refer to that approver empty # value is basically going to be returning null. It won't return 0, it returns null. So if you need to compare a null value in your workflow, that's what that would be for. Now let's say we wanted to bring information and update that variable based on what's been queried. So we have this query list function. And the query list function allows you to go and select data from another list that's not the current list you're working with, and bring that in and use it as part of your process. So let's say we'll get demo list info, and we're going to go and pull back info from this demo list we have over here. And we can use a query, and we're going to pull back just items where upload I9, I don't know, whatever, upload I9 equals true. So just an example, we're going to be pulling back only items from this list where upload I9 equals true. We can do an item collection. Let's do that, item collection. So that's going to bring back multiple items and versus a single item. And then when we get that value, get that data, we can actually map that to a variable. So tying the query list into our variable tool, we can go and map this into the variable. So we can go and pull that field, upload I9 #upload I9. So I think so. Note on these placeholders, this is going to be the display value on the left-hand side, and this will be the internal name on the right-hand side, which in this case is probably gonna be something like, because I probably created it with 020 or something like that with a space in it. You can go and look up that literal value, that display value, by going to the list settings. So that's why a lot of times it's helpful to have the list settings page of the list you're working with open in a tab to the left or to the right. So in this case, if I wanted to see what that literal value was, I can go to the demo opportunities. Let's see, make sure I'm working on the right one. Demo list, that's it. Go to settings and then upload I9. So what you're going to see here are the two different options. The display name is what's being shown from the column. So this is the SharePoint display name. Of course, through Nitro Forms, we also have a way to override that even further, but this is when you're using this in the context of our workflows or references and those placeholders, this is where you want to get the display name from. And then your internal name is going to be up here at the top. So I actually did not create this with spaces, so that's fine. But if I did, it would have that x00 blah blah blah. But you would be able to get that from this field equals option up here in the URL. So if you ever need the internal name, this is where you get it. You can go up to the URL and see that. You can get the display name from here. So you can just do a copy, paste just to make sure you get it exactly right. So do copy V, Control V, and then we'll do same thing up here at the top, select what you need, hit copy, V, the Control V, make sure it's exactly what you want it to be. So that especially becomes important when you have a lot of those extra characters for spaces and hyphens or something else that was created as part of that name. And that's why a lot of times you'll see us creating these columns without a space, because it makes it a lot easier to put in these functions. But essentially now what we're doing is saying we're taking the value, it happened to be this field, but we could pull another field from that list. If we want to go back to that demo list, we can pull any of these values in the same way, like QR code, value, whatever. If that's a hash, we could bring, or a URL, we can bring that into the form or into the workflow and use it. Things like that. And then any one of these could be brought in. So bring it in, we set our value, set our variable. We can add multiple variables, so it doesn't have to be just one. We could take the information from multiple fields, and then we can use that later on in our process. So now we've updated the variable value using this query list, and now I can use that information elsewhere. So I can update a list item or create a list item. Do create. Item, and then we can go and create it somewhere else. Let's say we want to go, we pull the information from demo list. We pull the information from demo list. We're working on this demo opportunities list, but maybe we want to go and fill out some other lists, like I'll just use loan application as an example. So we pick some value, say title, and then we can bring in that approver empty hash value, or we could use that in a function to map the value into that and use it. So there's some different ways that you can use the variables and map information from a query list into a variable. You could also directly use the query list value like this. You could do, let me go back for a step here. Get demos list info. So you can use this query list action name. Oh, I want to do this. Okay. All right, loan application. Add column mapping, and then we can do something like, go into whatever field we want to go into, and we can use that get demo list info. Now we can pull in, we can actually directly pull in from that. Instead of using a variable, we could actually just go pull from that list directly, because we know here's the list we're tagging into. We pull back, let's say we pull back one item. Now we can go and do the same thing. Instead of using a variable, we could use this directly. So a couple different ways to get you to the same place for variables, just to show you those examples. So you can use this when you go and query a list. That gives you basically gives you a license to use any of the fields from that list and from the items that you're referencing in that query list. So you can go and do that. Go get that information, and you can use that for your column mappings to put into your form. And then you could also use this in I believe you can use this in functions as well. So you could even take that information, put it into a function. So it gives you a way to kind of nest all that stuff and put it into a workflow for updating values and using this in processing. All right, so that kind of is the good primer on the query list and the functions. We can also use query list to just one more thing we can talk about here. Query lists can do lookup columns. So if you have a lookup column pointing back to the current list, you could do that. If you wanted to get related items, let's say you have your task list in like an IT site or something like that. You have a task list that you want to get all the tasks for a particular item. Let's say I can actually pop open our IT site and we can take a look at that. And I'll go to our Nitro Workflows on this site. All right. Pull that open, and then we can get all tasks. So let's create a new workflow here. And we're going to update item tasks. So that's our workflow. We're going to update all item tasks. We're going to key it off of a particular list here called tickets, and we're going to run this. This could be user triggered. Let's say run a workflow where we do a user triggered. Of course, we could just put this in custom actions if we're triggering it. We could schedule it, or we could do it. Let's do an items modified. Let's do after 10 minutes. And then the change here would be kind of the example that's best for this is if we do request status. Request status equals after change closed. Okay, so just a quick note about what we're doing here. So we're looking for when the item is modified, and we're going to run this 10 minutes after that item is modified. And the intention is that's going to run after someone marks that request status, changes this field to be closed. So we can use this after change condition to read a value. If you wanted to do this or run this for any change in that particular value or that particular field, you can do after change any as an example. So that now it doesn't care what the selection is. It's going to say anytime request status changes, we're going to run this workflow. And then you can decide what it's going to do. So in this case, let's say closed, just the literal value of closed instead of the variable of any. We're going to do update list items. Actually, we're going to do query list first. Excuse me, we're going to do query list first. And we're going to get associated items. Get associated items. We're going to get an item collection. And we're going to get it from the list within our current site because we have that association between the tickets and associated tasks. And we're going to use this related items field. So when I choose related items, you'll see what it's done is it's looking at this associated task list. It sees there's a lookup pointing back to my current list that I'm working on and pulls that automatically into here. So I don't have to select it. It's here. If there are other lookup columns, they would appear here as well. There's just that one. So now we get that information. List view is basically going to be a filter beyond that. So this is already going to filter this collection down by the ID. So when we run this workflow on a particular item, it's going to know what that item ID is, that ticket ID. It's going to pass that item ID into here and say, okay, that for all items with this related ticket ID value, we're going to get that collection and then we're going to do something with it. So you can map your values if you want, but you can also just save it. If you have any variables, you could do that, but otherwise you can just save it. And then we can do an update list item action, mark tasks as closed. And we'll do this in the query list. So now we're taking an action on those query list items. So that's how we know we're working on our query list items. We created that query list. Now we're going and saying, okay, get those items in that query list and take some action on them. That action is going to be an update, and that action is going to be setting the task status as closed. Now, if you want to make that variable, that's kind of an interesting thing to do. You could say, okay, get the task status of the current item as your variable. Like here, let me show you. So you do variable, we do get status. And let's say you're doing it on the any condition. You can do request status. I'm pretty sure we request status. So I'm pretty sure we're using that as our internal column. Of course, I can always go and double check that to make sure, but let's just assume that's correct for now for the purposes of this webinar. So we're going to get the status. We're going to pull that request status from the current item. So I'm going to change this and say any. And I'm going to go to update. And I'm going to get associated items. And now I'm going to go and update that task status. And shoot, I should remember what I put as that variable. Was a get status, I think it was, right? Get status # value. So in the simplified scenario, what I showed you was a way to mark all those tasks as closed. But this actually gives you a way to mark all those tasks, which may not be relevant, but it may be relevant in certain scenarios where you can mark all those sub items, whatever the associated items are, whether tasks, milestones, wherever they might be. You can mark them as the same status as the parent item. So there might be a need for you to have a parent item. Let's say it's a project that you then mark as on hold. You can then mark all the tasks as on hold. That kind of scenario. But this gives you a way to make that variable and have have that be dynamic based on what it is actually happening in the form itself, rather than hard coding the closed function into it. Then we give it a name, update tasks. All right, so yeah, so it's kind of combining all these different things. We're after a change or any kind of change we're making on that request status, so we're going to go query all the items and we're going to update those sub items to it. So that can be repeated for multiple associated lists. That could be repeated for lookup items. So there's a number of different ways you can use that. All right, so let me just pop open the questions box and see if there's anything here. Looks like Scott's been doing a good job of answering all the questions. Up to this point, I just want to see if there was anything else we wanted to take a look at. All right, okay. Okay, great. All right, so we can dig into those questions in a little bit, in a more interactive way in just a little bit. Kind of going back to the tool here, one of the things you might have noticed, and I kind of just glossed over, so might not have noticed it, in the query list or in any of these actions, or we have this cross-site functionality. So in a lot of ways, our stuff is working within one site. That's fine, but you might have a need or have a requirement to go and update things across different sites and in different areas. We have the specify sites URL option for that purpose. So, for example, let's say I want to add a list item. Demo list item. All right, so now I'm working from within the context of an IT site, IT professional. That happens to be our site that we're working from. We can go and get a URL from somewhere else, which I'm going to pop open here for one of my demo sites I've been using. We can go and add that in here. And then now I can pull all those lists from that site. So not only do we have that capability of working and operating within the context of the current site, we're going to now go and pull information from another site. So if you're using IT and assets, or if you're just connecting up two different sites, and a lot of times you have different permissions, scenarios, different permissions requirements for those different sites, and you want to maybe have people operating in one site but then updating things in another site but not give them access to that other site. This is one way to do it. So we can go and create items or update items in a site that's not the one we're currently working on. So in this case, we can go and add something to our demo list, and we're just going to do our column mappings. It's going to actually pull in those columns from that demo list, which are here, and then we can go and fill out those values as needed. So we can do that from right in here. All right. Okay, good. So that covers a lot of the things I want to talk about. Let me see if there's anything else here. Actually, one other thing I want to mention while we're going through this is I mentioned about the ability to chain workflows and stuff like that. And I showed you that you can do that through this user triggered option. What I mean by that, let me go ahead and create a quick actually I have one open over here. Let's go to demo workflows. Let me save that. So I see, you can see this one's marked as a user triggered workflow. If I go and create a new one, invoke workflow. So invoke a workflow. I'm going to do it on the current list opportunities. And then I'm going to, this one's going to be when an item is, we'll do it on a schedule. Let's say on a schedule, we're going to do something every week. And then when I go and create an action, I can create this invoke workflow action. And let's do invoke. And I can give it the actual name, like invoke all opportunities flow. I can invoke it on the current item, so that way it'll show me items with that trigger on here. If I had a lookup item in our demo opportunities, I could go and pull that lookup, and then any workflows on that list would be available for me. And then if you're not using a lookup, you could also do a query list like we've done before, where you could go and select that query list, get the access to that list, and then use workflows from that. We can use a SharePoint Visual Studio workflow. We can use a Nitro Workflow marked as user triggered. Or you see here, we also have Microsoft Flow, which I know is Power Automate now, but that's the same thing. You basically can go and invoke a Microsoft Power Automate flow from here as well. So you can do that within the Nitro workflows. You can also do that from our custom actions tool if you've seen that invoke workflow function in that tool. That's available there as well. But yeah, so this will give you a way to invoke it, either video current. You can see there's that invocation. I can go and select it. So again, that's not coming up here unless I have that user triggered option selected. So just be aware of that. You have to have user triggered selected on your when function here to trigger that workflow. Now, if you have different scenarios where you basically want to run the same kind of workflow, but maybe in different events for kicking it off, you want to create a workflow or have workflow kick off when an item is created, but you also want it to be user triggered or scheduled or some scenario like that. That's easy enough to work with, because what you can do is if we go and save this, I'll show you there's an option for exporting the workflow and then importing it back in. So when you do that import, you can use a different event type as your trigger. So let's say we wanted to send this one out on a, right now it's user triggered, but I want to set it to be a scheduled report instead. All I need to do is export that. It's going to create this JSON file on my hard drive. I go and create a new workflow. Do all opportunities and just give it a name like scheduled. Actually, I can't use the dash. I'll just use scheduled. And we'll do this on our demo opportunities list. You'll see it doesn't come up with that option to add it until you've selected your list. So I select my list. Now I have this option to import my workflow settings. Now I go select my files. I go and select my JSON. I hit open. I hit import. And see, it's pre-selecting this here, and it's got that workflows, these two actions I've created down here. But now I can also go and change when that is fired off. So that same workflow that and this is a good way to test workflows as well. So the same workflow can be triggered on different scenarios. If you wanted to do it on scheduled, that's fine. If you do it when items created, that's fine. Both those options are possible. You just create two different workflows, but you can export the settings from one workflow and put them into another. So it's a really neat way to do that. And so if you're testing workflows and you want to trigger it through like a custom action, that's a really easy way to test your workflows and say, okay, I want this to happen every month, but you don't want to wait a month to see if it's actually going to fire, right? So you want to use user triggered, create a custom action referring to that workflow, hit the custom action, trigger your workflow, see what's happening, check your logs. That's a good point. Check your logs. I didn't mention that yet. So we'll move beyond this a little bit. One of the other cool things we've added recently is this workflow health dashboard. Now, you may not be aware of it. This is available for Office 365 customers. We don't quite have it for on-prem yet, but if you're using Office 365 and Nitro, you can create a workflow health dashboard. I'll show you what that looks like. And this is going to pop up any errors that you come across in your workflow. I think I closed that page. Let me go ahead and open it. Hang on a second. It is in site contents, and it is in site pages, and it's going to create, and then we can take this link here, this workflow errors dashboard. We can actually take this link and promote it up, put it as a link over here on the left, on the top. It's just a URL essentially. So there's going to be this workflow execution errors. So as you go through it, let's say you're testing your workflows with that user triggered option, and you want to make sure the query is happening. You want to make sure that stuff's happening, that things are going to work. You can see in this case, we're getting errors, and you can see which workflows the errors are happening on, which lists the errors are happening on, the reason those errors are happening, and when it was executed. And they have some dashboard information down here as far as reports, errors by list name, workflow name, and then you can go through and see how many errors are occurring per month, per whatever, per error count by action taken. So It gives you a way to go in here and say, you know what, actually, I've resolved this error now. I can mark that as resolved. I haven't resolved it, but let's just assume I did. I hit OK. I'll just leave work log blank. So let's just assume I resolved that. You can see here's the action. It's been resolved, and it's going to change the count of ones that are pending. It will eventually. It's going to update it. But that's the idea. We have this whole workflow dashboard. And then if you're on-prem and you don't have this workflow dashboard available just yet, do be aware that you can dig into a specific list. In each of these workflows, we can create an execution history list. All we need to do is enable the execution history. It'll have a name, which we can input a name, or we can use the default name. Either way is fine. And that's going to give you more, the workflow dashboards will give you the errors, but if you go to the actual list here, let's say if I go to, say I did not enable that one, there's another one I have on here I can look at. There's a couple of these here, demo opportunities lists. If I go to this one, it's going to tell me the workflow status. So you have that status option where you can show the different times that the workflow is kicked off. What was it a success or failure? And sometimes if it's success, you may not still get an email or something like that, but that could be a condition, like your conditions aren't met. Maybe you don't have them quite set up correctly. This will give you that information. This one says it was successfully run, but you can see here the workflow conditions weren't matched, so it didn't fire off. It's wasn't a failure per se, it just means the conditions you had didn't work, so it's not going to do it. If you want to add this into your site, it's going to add, when you add this page, it's going to add it to your site contents under site pages. But to add it to your site, you can go to Nitro Studio, go to Nitro Admin Home, go to Nitro Applications, and it should pop up under the updates. Let's see, I have you'll see a lot less than what I'm seeing. And here it is. It will probably pop up under the updates. It'd just be the only item in this list. It should be the only one. Another way to get there, if you want to create it, is if you're on the workflow tool itself. Where am I here? Okay, cancel that. If you click this gear in the upper right, and you go to workflow logs, and across the top there's a workflow logs on the right-hand side. Workflow health dashboard. I've already installed it, so it's going to take me directly to it. So this is another way to get to it. If you don't want to go through the site contents and site pages, you can actually go workflow health dashboard and get to it that way through the UI of the workflow tool. Or you can, if it says install workflow health dashboard, what it's going to do is bring you to this page and where you have this workflow health dashboard option. Again, that should be the only one on this page that you see. It's going to be under updates under Nitro applications. So that's a relatively new thing we just released. I wanted to point that out to you and make sure you were aware of it. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. Show you those logs, how you can diagnose if the workflows are firing off or not. You got those log lists that you can go to. You got that workflow health dashboard you can go to for errors specifically. And just quick note, this is a dashboard, modern page dashboard. So if you wanted to add other list views in here, you certainly could do that just through using the edit option over here. So you can customize this as you need. Now, looks like we had a couple questions, and any other questions you guys might have, feel free to pop those in there. Anything, Scott, anything we should bring up on this?
Let's see, one just came in the last minute. What's the path for the workflow dashboard? I think you did answer that, right?
Yeah, I was showing, I saw that question, so that's why I started talking about how to get to the Nitro Studio page and go to Nitro Applications and do all that. So hopefully, if that's answer your question, great. If not, let me know and we can dig back into it.
Okay, what about this interaction with Power Automate, or what used to be called Microsoft Flow? You showed that, how we have that action and everything?
Yeah, so if you're on the Nitro Workflow tool, you have a option to invoke a workflow, and that workflow can be a SharePoint Visual Studio workflow, a Nitro Workflow, or a Power Automate. Well, it says Microsoft Flow right now. That's on our list of one of those little changes we need to just make it to say Power Automate instead of Microsoft Flow, but it's the same thing.
Right. So you create a flow, and then you could get the parameters of that flow and put it into the Invoke workflow section of Nitro Workflow.
That's right.
So, and that does, we have it doing stuff like putting an attachment in OneDrive, for example, or what was the other thing we're doing? We're doing several things with Flow. I mean, there's various things. I mean, you could do a lot with Flow, like write to external databases and things like that. But I mean, you could work entirely with our Nitro workflow too. It's just a matter, if you do happen to be using Flow and have a flow going already, then you could easily add that on to your Nitro workflow. Nitro workflow could invoke that workflow,
Hmm.
that flow workflow, the Power Automate workflow, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
But you don't have to. It's just
Hmm.
if you're already using it, right? Sort of like whatever suits your fancy, sort of thing, right?
Hmm. That's right.
And then there was something about a modern UI portal creating using a data grid to show data from a SQL database, and we could definitely do that. It's just a web part that shows up on our modern UI portals, and then the data would show up in a grid, a web part grid. It could
Hmm.
be manipulated or accessed or used in other purposes in the modern UI portal. The portal would have a form or workflows on it. I mean, it depends what you want to do with the portal. We use a lot of our portals for application integration, where the customers or users go to the portal and get information or start some process, create a ticket, uh, look up data. Even a bot can run. Though we have bots in Teams, a bot can also run in the web portal. Did you talk about the Teams integration? I didn't.
No, actually, I didn't. I did not talk about the Teams integration. That is a part of what we have here in our workflow tool. I'll pick a list here so I can pull it up. But we have these. I think I had a webinar on this a while back, but it's always good to revisit that we have this Microsoft Teams options. If you're using without
Yeah,
a bot, actually, you can do these first two. You can create a Teams channel or send an email to a Teams channel. Both are possible. And then the post and adaptive card action would be interactive with our bot, where you could post that card to the bot, and that could be, we're calling it Teams right here. It's kind of within Teams at the moment, but that's certainly something we could have as a bot outside of Teams. It doesn't have to be there. We just have to know the endpoint of connecting to that bot, and then we can basically connect to it and send a card to a user wherever that bot might be located. But right
that's
now,
right.
right now out of the box, it's pointing to Teams, but that's the construct is there for the bot to be wherever it needs to be.
Okay. Yeah, that was the standard questions. If anyone has any other questions, they can put them in the question box, or we could meet one-on-one for specific, needs that you might have, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, that's what I want to show you. Kind of towards the tail end here. I'll keep an eye on that questions box in case anything pops in. But we have our support page site here where we have the resources. You guys probably hopefully are aware of this. If not, feel free to use this to your advantage, where you can search our knowledge base. We have a lot of stuff on this crocanon.help site. You can chat with our team. We have this new forum I'll show you in just a minute, and then we have other links to some other resources and other workshops that are coming up. We have let's see, upcoming webinars. We have upcoming webinars, upcoming workshops, and then let's take a look at what some of those are.
We have a webinar on next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, on using bots, and particularly to show a leave request.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, a little bit of IT support, leave requests, and purchasing. So, kind of showing different ways the Nitro bot can be used inside a Teams bot.
Absolutely.
And so, obviously you'd be on Office 365 for that. If you're on SharePoint on premises, you might be going to Office 365 at some point, so still be interested in the webinar and what it has in it. So that's next Thursday, and I'll be doing that one a week from tomorrow.
Yep. Then we have another one coming up in February for automating asset management. Then we're going to be talking about kind of a basic Nitro Studio 101, which hopefully you guys are good with that. But if you want to join that one, that's going to be coming up later in February. So that's fine. We'll do a primer on Nitro Studio. For workshops, we have a couple things. We got this one today. I don't know if the others, oh yeah, they have been added. We'll talk a little bit more about those repeating rows and associated items. And then we'll do another kind of a deep dive workshop into Nitro reports and talk about multi-series reports and different options you have with the reporting tool. So that'll be coming up in March. And then, you guys get kind of first dibs on this some exciting news here. We have this community forum, which we're building out. So you feel free to go to our crookhan.help site, click on the forum, and you'll have an option to log in and register. There's not a lot there, just not a lot there yet because we don't have a lot of people signed up yet, but this is a new thing we're going to be building out over the course of the first half of the year here, where you can input some questions, get some feedback from the user community of Nitro Studio. We already have a few people signed up. So if others on this call are interested, just go to our crookhan.help/forum, click on register, follow the steps, and we'll get you engaged and up and running and participating in that forum.
It's
Um,
very easy to register, just a username and password.
yep,
Really not much to it.
no, not really, but
We also
yeah,
have the
so,
chat in the bottom right. You can see the
yep,
chat if you want to chat with the support team directly.
yep. So multiple ways to engage with us and engage with the community. So feel free to take advantage of those resources. And yeah, I guess any parting words from your side, Scott?
No, I think we're all set. Thanks for the presentation. There's always more to learn about forms, workflows, custom actions, and any of the time we can interact with the customers and find out what your particular needs are, that's better and helps guide us as to where to focus our development and where we can best help you out. And there's a lot of tricks we can do with scripting and everything else. Workflows do get complicated sometimes. There's a lot of things we can do that you just have to ask if Nitro can do it. And a lot of times we can, or we can just easily adjust some script or whatever to do what you need done. So,
That's right.
okay, that's all I have to say. Thanks, James.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate your attendance on today's workshop, and look forward to seeing you at the next one. And I see some of your names on there, so I'm sure I'll be talking to some of you soon. But have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.